Welcome, artists, to our caricature study, a step-by-step guide to trying to map the face accurately when you've got a model in front of you. I'm going to try to tackle a friend of mine. Let me introduce you to Nick, who, if I think you cover his scalp with a finger, bears a passing resemblance to Legolas from Lord of the Rings. Now, he's got some pretty angular features. There's a lot of things that are iconically Nick. But before I sit down and do a really high detail concept, I don't want to get lost by the distractions of details. Eyes, eyelashes, nostrils. It's interesting, of course, to start with those things because they're a little more compelling, say, than the silhouette. But I could get a very narrow view. I could get tunnel vision if I work from the inside out. Instead, I want to start with basic shapes and then work from the biggest shapes into the smallest, all right? And one thing that's really helpful, before you start on your good paper, consider doing a bunch of small thumbnails rather than doing your big rough one. Some small, like quick ones, maybe no longer than a minute each. And what you'll recognize when you're doing that are some tropes. If I give myself only a minute to try to draw Nick, let's see here, really angular jaw, ear, big coif in his hair. Don't want to spend too much time on it. Otherwise, I get that tunnel vision. Just break it down to basic shapes. Kind of calm eyes. And a cockeyed smile. And a jaw that is slightly asymmetrical. Okay? Why am I doing a really simple single one? Well, rather than overthinking and spending way too much time on my good draft, and then ultimately probably treating it like it's a bit too precious, if you invest hours into a drawing to make it perfect, and it's not ideal, you don't walk away from it feeling convinced that, like, yes, this is as good as it can be. Like, even then, you might not want to make changes because you vested so much time into it. Like, you don't want to have to go back into it. It's this or nothing, right? Well, no, that's a bad mindset because then, like, issues that you recognize, you may just double down on and repeat in the final draft when you vector it. So doing some simple, really quick thumbnails where you just try to get basic shapes down is a great way to practice so you know what you want to repeat and avoid in the final draft. And just doing this one really quick one, I'm noticing, well, let's see here. He has a much more narrow in appearance looking face, right? His hair, I'm going to exaggerate it a bit. When I do the final one, I need a bigger poof, right? Jawbones need to be more emphasized. I think these need to be shorter, like less wide. His head narrowed in, and more of an extreme angle, right? So when I start my good one, I can reference this and make certain I don't repeat those mistakes, make the changes I want. So now let's look at Nick and try to work from big to small. So first, let's see if we can get the jawline. Now I'm seeing a bit of an angle here, right to the left of the sort of butt chin, if you will. Rather than going perfect vertical line up, it looks like it's at a bit of an angle. Up at the temple, more of a vertical line there. Rounded skull on the top. I'm looking through the hair, having to x-ray it to get that curve because the shape of the hair is dictated by the shape of the skull. So I'll start with this and then obscuring it in the end. All right? Okay, so ears, about here. And before we go much further, let's give you some tips and tricks. when dividing the human face up, you can actually map the features with a formula. If I quarter the head, that is to say, half the height from top of skull to bottom of chin, if I just draw a horizontal line, and then a vertical line halfway from the furthest point to the left and the right of our cheeks here, well, the eyes rest right on that middle line. It goes right through the middle of them. And they're separated by a third invisible eye. That helps. The top of the ear, not the very, very top, which is in line with the eyebrows, interestingly enough, but the top that connects the uppermost part of the ear that actually has skin running from the ear to connect to the head, that is in line with the eyes as well. So that means I have an ear that looks kind of like this, right? And it comes down to the bottom of his nose. The lobe is in line with the nose, and the nose is halfway between eyes and chin. Halfway between eyes and chin, that's the bottom of the nose. Halfway between bottom of nose and bottom of chin is the mouth. Those are my placeholders, right? But now I have to make them look uniquely Nick. I don't need the guide anymore. I'm going to lightly erase it. Now let's see. For one thing, he has very angular features. I'm going to bring these in a bit because I also want to narrow his face so I don't run into the same problem I had here. Then it looks like his jaw is a little slimmer. I'm going to bring it in here. And then, interestingly enough, his jaw isn't quite symmetrical. It's cockeyed. It's a little tilt. Even when he doesn't smile, his jaw is just a little misaligned. Subtle, but I'm going to include it. Now, I've scaled the head. I've kind of shaved off some unnecessary width there, so he looks a little more bony and severe. Now, let's see here. It looks like the jawbone, top of it, starts where the ear connects, comes down and curves. Let's see, comes to about here. I'm just going to bring this line down. There we go. We can always fine-tune it later, make it a little less overly simplistic there, a little oversimplified. And it looks like we've got his sort of cockeyed grin. Moves up and down on each side just a little. And here's a fun fact. When you shade, you tend to notice that the upper lip is a little more emphasized. It's a little darker in value than the lower. And that's because, of course, you've got light coming down like so. Top of the lip, well, it's like a canopy. Light hits the lower lip, but isn't lighting the upper lip so ideally. So this tends to be a little darker. So that's why you oftentimes see the upper lip connected, maybe shaded a bit, especially in cartoons, with the lower lip being a little less fully realized, maybe half a line, maybe a crease or something. But for Nick, I think we'll just keep this lower part right here. Maybe make it a shadow because it's very subtle. Could be a bit of shadow cast from the canopy of his lower lip, or it could be a little bit of poor shaving there. But let's give us some of these shadows that add form to him. Very subtle. These could be made when we vector. Then the nose. Well, let's see here. I'm going to start with the ball, the tip of the nose. And it looks like an oval. He's got a pretty prominent oval there, not just a circle. Some people might have a circle, some might look like a square. Again, I try to always tackle complex shapes by breaking them down to simpler ones and putting them together. The nose then has sort of a cone above it here. And then the nostrils. Now here I'm gauging, well, how far out do they come on either side? His nose isn't crazy prominent. Nostrils. Sort of shadow underneath there. All right. There we go. Okay, now his eyes, let's see here. If I had to boil them down to a basic shape, I want to avoid this cliche. Just this generic, almost hieroglyphic. It's like a symbol of an eye, but no one really has eyes that look like that. Your eyelids, your socket, the brow above it, that is to say the part that your eyebrow rests on your face, the lashes, all these things determine the shape. So I might start with the basic, but know that I got to go in and then refine it. So looks like he has a longer eye that curves down a little sooner. And his eyes kind of seem to smile. So I'm going to make certain that they seem kind of soft, very welcoming, kind of cool and laid back. And that can be determined based off the curves you make, of course. So like, you know, here all of a sudden we have a sort of boxy, angular eye, and that makes it look, you know, squinted and more a little like more pursed, a little more like sort of like frozen action, like maybe glaring over the nose or zooming in. Soft, right? Like, all right. Almost maternal because you can see it like creasing down from age, right? Like if you actually finish the, there. Right? Shapes mean a lot. His art look pretty relaxed, so they're kind of half-lidded. And I'm definitely gonna have to go back in here and make some corrections. But next, let's do eyebrows, and they're actually pretty iconic on him because they're pretty thick. So, and they kind of swoop down. They're thicker than most people, so I'm probably gonna add 1 or 2 little points of texture. Okay. Then next, when we're just putting the basics in for now, then let's go in and create the shape of the hair. Now, where the hair meets the temple, it kind of shaves into the skull, right? It's hiding part of it. It comes in a bit up here. And then we've got this really harrowing coif, the swoop up of his hair. Like this. And I'm going to exaggerate it a bit because it's one of the things I notice first about him whenever we get together. It just jumps out. It's so prominent. I feel like it needs to be made more prominent. Okay. All right. Then he's got a pretty long bony neck with a very prominent Adam's apple. So it looks pretty thick in the image, but that also gives him more of an athletic look, which while in shape he doesn't quite have. I'm going to pull the neck in a bit to give him more of a like younger boyish look. A little more in matching with his personality. And this is why we're considering the spacing of things, right? The proportions, how far apart they are from each other. The shapes of things as well, like the ball of the nose that's more oval. The eyes we'll have to revisit to make look like his eyes. The curve of the mouth or the slight tilt of the jaw. But it's also personality. How does the person make you feel? what are their most prominent features, and that gives you some wiggle room. I'm going to go in and I'm going to create, I definitely got to emphasize that Adam's apple in there. Probably with a bit of shadow in the final. Okay, now here we've got the basic shapes, but now it falls upon us to go in and refine. I think those eyes just look a little more angular, and I want to try to capture that. So let's see here. I'm going to move the eyebrows over a bit then. And I think they almost need to be closer to his eyes. I don't want to make him look furrowed or concerned. Oh, no, see, that wasn't the right call either, because then it makes his forehead seem that much larger. And he has large hair, but a rather tiny forehead. The former probably causing the latter. All right, I'll move this eye in so it's a little more symmetrical with its partner. Now let's see here. Interesting. That seems to strike me as more of an accurate angle now, too. I can see this more prominent vertical line along his jaw. When we vector this, these will probably just be very soft shadows so they don't look like weird Wolverine facial hair, right? Let's get a little more angular here. And really, his face does seem boxier to me. I'm going to bring these lines down, make corrections, because as I work, I'm going to revisit, again, using shape, proportions, and personality to try to capture the right look. I think I might bring them in a bit more. And then let's add the ears in line with the nose. There we go. And they come out at an angle as well. I also am going to re-emphasize hair because in person, it's so much more obvious and such a big part of his personality. I'm going to change the shape a bit. There we go. Yep. I'm much happier with that. I might add the slight hint of eyelids to help with that relaxed look in the final pass. On the other hand, he has pretty prominent eye sockets. So you know what? I'll let that add a greater sense of depth to his eyes. I'll use a different highlight and some coloring when I'm in my in the vectoring phase. So now I still have a little more work to do. There are a lot of elements that still look a little too generic. They look like a young teenage guy, but not Nick necessarily. So before I declare myself done, I'm going to go through each part of my design, each choice I've made in terms of spacing, shape, and the personality, and I'm going to make little changes. Now, even still, it doesn't have to be perfect because when I end up scanning this and tracing over it and create new vectors and shapes, well, those can be free transformed, moved around, and altered with ease. So I can still make corrections. I just want to make certain that before I scan it, I've got a good, confident likeness here that I can build off of. Because if I'm making it from scratch, it's going to take a lot more time in the program. If I've got an informed decision already started, then I can put in the basic shapes, then go back in to refine it. So let's just darken what we're happy with so far and take a look at kind of like where we're headed. See if this adds a little more definition to the shapes we've chosen. And then we can add just a little ornamentation if we're feeling pretty good about it. Little details we might put in the final draft, the vectored image. We need some extra hair there. Okay. Let's get that one little swoop up of skin. Oh, and I gotta capture a little of the depth of his hair. It flows in and around itself really drastically. Let's just do a couple shapes to hint at that. We don't need crazy detail, but a couple shapes when vectoring can make all the difference. Kind of giving you a nice sense of flow and kind of a slick style here. We can make these really slick and stylish if we want to establish a look. Ooh, I like that. Okay, now let's go back in. Nope, that's right. We're working at a bit of a slant there. Let's work with some shadow. And I can tell even now I'm absolutely going to alter these eyes a bit more. But I'll wait to do that in the program. While he's very laid back, I think I might want to open the eyes up just a bit more so he doesn't look, it looks a little like he's sleepy. And that's definitely not his personality. He's one of the most engaging people I know. So I'll probably have to go back in. He also has pretty prominent eyelashes I'm noticing as I look at this. I'm going to probably need to tackle some of those. Oh, and I just noticed that they kind of make a bit of a triangle. I got to get those eyebrows a little more accurate. Interesting. So this side's too flat. And these are little changes you can make while you police yourself. You never want to go with just the first concept or first image unquestioned. Go back in and ask yourself where it could stand to look a little more realistic, a little more accurate. Just always ask yourself about the choices you're making, why you're making them, and if they could be a little better. I'm also noticing that the spacing of the eyes and the eyebrows are a bit of a problem too, because there's not this much drastic space between like his eyebrows in the image, and like the eyebrows I got here, mine is off. So this is why, again, I don't need to make all these changes now, but I want to make notes. So like spacing, eyes. I'm making little notes so when I go into vector, I can make changes too, okay? Okay. And it helps to add a little value in there to see what it might look like when I ultimately do the same vectoring. They don't quite look right, do they? Aha! I'm going to make these a little more drastic, bend them upward, and meet the shadow right here. That's already looking more accurate to me. Okay. And there we are. It's a nice start. Changes will definitely have to be made once I'm in the program, but I think I have enough to scan, to start tracing the basic shapes, and then to start playing around with them like Play-Doh, warping them, moving them around, and seeing what looks best. Okay? If you've got any questions, do not hesitate to ask. Remember, in the final phase, you can not only move things around and once you've vectored it, distort, play around, and experiment, but you can also add gradients, like swap out colors for different choices you might like more, and even add a little more ornamentation, a little more blood to the cheeks. Bring down the opacity of wrinkles to make them a little less intense and obvious. To even add suggestions of like texture in their clothing. And that then brings us to our last part. You're gonna want the neck and a bit of the body and shoulders within view. So make certain you've gathered enough references to not only see like what the person looks like when they're relaxed, when they're emotional from different angles. All this information is going to be helpful to inform the decisions you make when it comes to shapes, proportions, and personality. But also to kind of see what is their uniform? What is the clothing they most commonly wear, right? If you've got 20 photos of them and in maybe 10 of them they're wearing a bowling shirt or a Hawaiian shirt, it's a safe bet that that would be a really good likeness if you do the same. Nick tends to wear t-shirts of simple primary colors. I'm going to bring his shoulders in so they are in line with the ears. Like a lot of caricatures then, this is amplifying the size of his head and de-emphasizing his body so that his face is the focus, and I rather like it. It's a tool that Stanley Chow uses that I definitely want to borrow from in my own. Okay? Let's see what you've got, my friends. Remember, start off with informed decisions that come from a folder full of references of your person. Then move on to basic shapes, working from biggest to smallest. Take the opportunity to police yourself as you go, move shapes around, change them. Then scan, upload, and get ready to trace. You got this.